So we're getting back to the core content of our program. The next panel I know is relevant to everyone in the room because it's about sustainability, which impacts all of us. And it's a discussion on benefiting from a sustainable approach to space operations. So I'd like to ask our moderator, Carolyn Bell, from Orica Space Strategy Consulting to the stage, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for the discussion on the benefits from sustainable approaches to space operations. In space, we're in this position where we are being challenged to reckon with sustainability and how do we implement that earlier in our development than many other industries are. And this is only one of many challenges that we're facing. I mean, that's the theme of this entire conference, right, of new challenges, new opportunities that the industry is being presented with. Sustainability is certainly one of those. So today what our discussion will do is separate that ideal of sustainability, that grand vision of sustainability, from the more practical impacts that sustainable or unsustainable approaches would have on our businesses, our customers, and the health of our industry as a whole. So we have four wonderful panelists who can hopefully make their way to the stage and join us. We have Hazuki Mori, the lead for space technology at the World Economic Forum. Aya Iwamoto, the vice president of strategy and policy at Astroscale Japan. Aditya Baraskar, the scientist and global business lead for orbital lasers. And Anirudh Sharma, the founder of Digantara. So to kick us off today, we do have an audience survey that hopefully we can pull up the first one if you can start answering the question there, and we'll get back to that in a moment. So while you're busy doing that, Hazuki, I was hoping you could start us off, since you're in a bit of an interdisciplinary area at the World Economic Forum, with talking about what is sustainability. It's a catchphrase that people use a lot, but it means a lot of different things to different people. So what are the different pieces to that puzzle that we should have in mind to sort of guide us through this conversation?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hazuki Mori. I work at the World Economic Forum. And yeah, we're here to talk about sustainability. I will begin in a boring way to read with the definition of what sustainability is in the UN context. And then I think we can, take it from there. So in the UN and at the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, basically long-term sustainability for space is defined as the ability to maintain the conduct of space activities indefinitely into the future in a manner that realizes the objectives of equitable access to the benefits of exploration used for peaceful purposes in order to meet the needs of the present generation while preserving the environment. So this is probably the only definition we can actually see of space sustainability, but this is really not a definition that's in the industry. I don't think no one has an agreed definition on space sustainability. And the only motivation for companies to do sustainability activities is, first of all, if you're truly in line with space sustainability, if you have the passion, if you have the true conformity with the issue. The second one is if there's actual regulations that you will be punished, or if there's any taxes that will come up on you. So basically you need to be kind of forced into that. Or the third motivation is it's a way for you to use it as a strategy for CSR, for ESG. I think it was mentioned in the beginning, in the morning as well. So you really have to have this motivation to do space sustainability because there is no clear definition. I found a document that was actually useful. NASA has the space sustainability strategy, and they identified 4 domains to think about when you do sustainability. So one is about Earth, our Earth here. The second is Earth's orbit. The third is cislunar space, so including the Lagrange point and the lunar surface. And the fourth point is deep space. And as you might know, if we talk about sustainability on Earth, It goes on to so many different aspects, as you can imagine. The terrestrial supply chains, the impact of launch on wildlife or the environment, the effects of re-entering satellites in the atmosphere. So I think we shouldn't cover that here, but of course that's an important aspect of sustainability. But I think our panel is more about the orbit, about the Earth's orbit. And when we talk about that, we have to think about the physical aspects, so debris, but also the different aspects of resources in the sense of frequency and spectrum. So I think there's many different aspects of sustainability, but I think we'll take it from the last point for this panel, if I understood correctly.
Sounds good, thank you. All right, do we have any results on that first poll that we could have a glance at? If not, they'll come up as we're chatting. So let's dive into this question of dividing the moral from the practical. So usually we do hear more about that moral. You should be sustainable. It's the right thing to do. We need to think about the future, all of which may be true. But what we're hoping to dive into is instead the real drivers for why it makes sense to do today and tomorrow. So what are elements for that business rationale for space players to think in this manner? Anyone want to dive in on that question first?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Anirudh Sharma, one of the co-founders and CEO of a company called Digantra. We are a space situational awareness company. So I can talk more about the business side of things. So one of the recent examples that I can talk about is the Intelsat breakup. So recently we saw an anomaly in Intelsat in the geostationary orbit, and it caused a lot of trouble to a lot of different operators in the orbit. And one of the first things that we had to do was track and identify why did this happen, because it was pretty much unknown. And to track this breakup, it took us a while because never did anybody think about predicting this collision before. It was totally an anomaly within the satellite. So it becomes imperatively important for anybody to understand the influence or even the impact of a collision or an anomaly that happens in the orbit, which is why awareness and tracking becomes more important to ensure that space is sustainable. In an orbit like GEO, where there are orbital slots, there is a term called orbit carrying capacity, which means you need to be able to understand where to place your satellite, and each of these orbits have limited slots. And we don't have things like in LEO orbit where you can just put as many satellites as you want. So it becomes very important for us to be aware of what is happening in the orbit. Hence, I think tracking becomes very important for us to ensure sustainability, not just for the present, but also for the future.
What are some of the other business reasons that a company might care about taking sustainable actions in their own operations? Aditya, what are your thoughts?
So if I see, so first of all, thank you for this panel discussion. My name is Aditya, and I came from Orbital Lasers, and we are the new startup come out from the JSAT, Sky Perfect JSAT. And sustainability, the approach we are taking out from the big company to a small startup is both from space and Earth, like space debris removal, detumbling, and the LiDAR satellite constellation for Earth observation for carbon and other things. When I'm thinking about the profitability or sustainability in space, yes, it's very important to understand, like Anirudh say, is like there is a capacity for GEO, which is like approximately 2,000 satellite can be operated. And if it's the distance is like very closer, there will be a possibility of breakups. If I see how many satellites are getting breakups, there is more than 680 satellites breakups are there, and those are providing very impactful reason to understand why we need to focus on future generation sustainability, or taking account for what and how to clear the space and develop a new approaches to create a profitability, create a equal opportunity for everybody. That's important.
So Astroscale is one of the first companies that was founded specifically to go after sustainability, and now building a business, venture capital, IPO, So why is it that people are giving you guys money to do sustainability? Why do they think that's a good investment for them to be making? And what is the big push on the strategy side for developing sustainability into a component of the industry and not just an element that people think about?
So thank you so much. My name is Aya Iwamoto. I'm from APSCC Japan, which is a Japanese subsidiary of APSCC Holdings, which is trying to promote space sustainability through on-orbit servicing. To answer that question, I think people have high expectation on space sustainability, and also I think investors would see what's happening on the ground, like an industry on the ground. There's been a pressure on behaving sustainably. I think Hazuki has laid out beautifully pressure from regulation and also pressure from investors, and that needs to be considered into strategy. So I think there's a high, as I said, high expectation of people, investors, or I don't know, people on the ground. The potential of space sustainability will become a business in the future. But at the same time, if I kind of sort of answer the previous question, I think there are many possible rationales, but none of them are still yet defining factor to transform the behaviors of the space operators. And also the question of space sustainability that falls into the kind of the failure of the market or tragedy of commons. So the question is, should we only discuss space sustainability in the realm of business case or things like that? So there's a lot of complex questions and that needs to be answered. And looking forward to this panel today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And thanks for pulling up the poll results. So excellent to see. I will admit I'm moderately surprised that our net value add is an answer of about 2/3 of the audience, that making your business sustainable can be a benefit there. So that's great to see, and hopefully we'll talk through some of the concerns that some of you net costers have in mind so that we can shift more of that to a net value add. It's interesting, Aya, that you mentioned that there are elements that people are thinking about, that operators are thinking about with sustainability, but none of them have flipped into the level of determining what actions they will take. So maybe it's different pieces of the puzzle, but there's not yet enough to get over that curve. What do you think it will take for us to be sustainable in space? Do you think there's enough of this conversation around benefits that we can hit enough incremental benefits to change behavior? Are we going to need to have government policy force us to change our behavior? Are we going to have a disaster in space that forces us to change our behavior because we won't be able to operate the way we were before? What is it that will shift us across that threshold to more sustainable activities?
I can take this one. So just a couple of days ago, I was at the United Nations for a topic that we were discussing around space traffic coordination and management at a global scale. Do we need a legally binding guideline for us to enforce space traffic management and coordination, or do we need something more technical? The answer is both. You need to have both, guidelines and technical capabilities for us to coordinate space traffic, and that again adds to space sustainability factor. So there are a lot of complications given the fact that this industry emerged out of defense history. So when you talk about space, I always draw parallels to aviation industry. So in the aviation industry, when we had fewer aircrafts, we didn't have global air traffic management. But today we have an organization that adheres to global air traffic management, and there are multiple countries, signatories or part of it. That's how we control traffic in aviation industry. But for the space industry, because of the fact that not all the spacefaring nations are aligned, it becomes very difficult for us to enforce something on the lines of coordination, because space is a common resource. And that again causes problem to sustainability of the orbit in the future. So one of the ways that we were discussing and we thought that could be useful was enforcing certain regulations through market entry, like how the United States does it today. For example, if you do not follow certain regulations that the US has right now, you don't get access to the US market. That is one way where commercial entities in different parts of the world ensures that they have to adhere to certain regulations. For example, the 25-year deorbiting rule that was more of a guideline. Today it's not a legally binding policy as such. That's one good step towards space sustainability, I would say. The second thing is there are a lot of technical challenges. Me coming from technical background, what I can tell is tracking itself is very difficult in the orbit because you have multiple factors that you have to account for, and then the technologies today and the sensors today are limited. So you need global coverage for you to be able to get good latency data sets. And it becomes difficult when you track an object that is moving at 16 times the speed of bullet in the lower Earth orbit. So you need more sensors for us to be able to track everything that happens in the orbit. So there is also a technical challenge that the world is facing today, where we don't have enough infra for us to be able to understand what is happening in orbit. Do we know every object where the location of these objects are? We don't at this point in time. So I think the first thing that we'll have to work on is build a technical infrastructure through which we will become capable enough for us to be able to track what's happening, and then also have a balance of on the policy side where we agree upon certain rules and regulations that the commercial operators have to follow. For example, being transparent about the ephemeris or sharing ephemeris data is one of the things that the global satellite operators do at this point in time, so that they're publishing data of each and every maneuvers that they do, so that SSA companies like us can track such activities and ensure we understand collision probabilities and report this back to the organizations that are involved in the process.
I like to add a few points. So as your question is like companies are doing or not, yes, that's how orbital laser comes, because JSAT saw that the problem, and our CEO is also saw when he was working with the US and Japanese company, and he saw a lot of problems when maneuver is important. Even the JSAT is more geo operator. We saw big problems over there, and that's how we spinning off and started a business. But SSA, what Anirudh is trying to explain with his company, is very important. So that's over there is important to get to know that geo operator or LEO operator or MEO operator or anywhere in the space, we need to have a traffic management. Yes, people will understand, because that's our human nature, that when catastrophic event happen, then we understand what's the needed. But what I learned from the Japan, living in Japan for 6 years, better to be take responsibility. It's a start to be precaution before getting any worse event happen. So that's how we are here, and we are talking about sustainability.
That's great to hear that approach of taking action while we still have access to the environment in which all of us make our money before we lose access to it. Any final thoughts on that question of what it will take to push us into more sustainability? All right. So we've been talking not as much on the technical side and the practical side of how we would do this. So curious, as we're thinking about, some satellites have been in orbit for a number of years, maybe some are reaching the end of life, some are being designed today, some are being manufactured. So where in the overall life cycle of thinking about a satellite development program does it make sense to start introducing sustainability? Is it something that needs to be done from a clean sheet of paper in the design phase, or is that something, if an operator has an asset that's 10 years old on orbit, they can still start implementing sustainability now?
So one thing is like balancing is important. One thing is like which is already in the space industry, or the satellite which is orbiting in GEO, LEO, or MEO, that's have to be upgraded. It's important. Like right now we are talking about software-based satellite systems also. So that's important. But same times the old generation satellite have to be provide more reliability, affordability, resource, fast growth, industry side, maintaining the balance of the profit side. We have to use those satellites. That's why the ISA market is growing. Same times the new generation satellite is also important. When new generation satellite will come, the market value will change, the more efficiently we generate economy, and that's how the space industry works. Like and in the last, we are working for creating the wealth. That's how we have to survive in the space industry, or we have to create a sustainable approach with the money-making side. Otherwise, we'll be not there. So both equally, from point of it, old use and new use is important.
I'm just going to be very brief. I think ideally it should start from the beginning of planning a business, or need to be incorporated into a business strategy that, in a way that makes sense for the business planning in the future, because space sustainability is, as we have discussed so far, it's very complex. It's not about technology, or it's not only about satellite designing. So I think it's very important that company needs to take the sustainability consideration right at the beginning of the planning the business, the future business.
Yeah, and if I may add to that, I think the satellites that are already up there, let's say, for those, I think these are things that Astroscale and many of these companies can help us tackle. But the ones that we're going to develop and launch now, we do have to take action to make sure that sustainability is considered, as Aya said from the beginning. And through one of the recommendation papers that we did at the World Economic Forum with the European Space Agency, we recommend that by 2030 that we make sure that all of these missions launched as of 2030, the end-of-life equipment will be placed on these satellites, so that they will have measures to make sure that they're coming back. So in that sense, I think it really doesn't matter who decides on this, but I think we have to start taking action to make sure that future satellites are really in line with sustainability.
When we look at the benefits and maybe integrating that sustainability into a company's strategy, is that also something that the earlier it's done in the process, the more benefit that you'll derive, the more efficiency that you'll get from making that satellite sustainable? So looking at, how we make this happen, we touched on it a little bit. Overall sustainability, how many players in space need to be involved for us to have a sustainable environment, right? Is this something that only government operators? We've seen investment by the government of Japan, the government of, ESA, and government players looking at this versus commercial players, versus how many commercial players we need. Who do you think needs to be involved in this conversation to really make it worthwhile and not just a nice effort that doesn't have much of an impact?
I'll take up I think eventually all of the space actors need to get involved. I think ideally that would be great, but of course their situation is very different from, states to states, and also operators to operator. There's a startup, so university, satellites, and so many of them. So when I talk about these kind of conferences, I would often say, everyone has sort of responsibility to when it comes to space activities, but whoever who can take the action should take the action now. Don't need to wait for others, or don't need to ask everyone to take the same action, but what you think is right, it's better to start now.
I'd like to add, yes, sustainability should be pushed by the government, and what we are seeing in ESA, European side or UK side, and especially Japan side, like Astroscale and these companies also coming out, and government is pushing to this industry like, okay, ATR, ISAM, SSA industry should be provide sustainability approach, but in the last, government will be only push up to one limit. Afterwards, it's more towards the business side, and the private industry have to come out and take over this sustainability, and then we'll be having a good environment and balancing between government and private players.
So then to put maybe a finer needle on this point of, when we look at the number of satellites, about half of them, give or take, are owned by a single player who is not usually involved in conversations around sustainability. When we look at the environment as a whole, we all operate in the same environment. slightly different if we're talking LEO versus GEO, but nonetheless, what do we do for operators who are wanting to be sustainable, knowing that their neighbor who's 10 times bigger than them is not taking those actions?
This is a very difficult question to answer because we had a situation, because we are an SSA company, we often track satellites and satellite activity, basically the maneuver history of all the satellites operating in the orbit. One of the things that we've seen is this major satellite operator, Starlink, doesn't really maneuver very often. I mean, even if they're in the path of collision, they expect the other player to maneuver, and this happens all the time. So there was an instance between Starlink and OneWeb a couple of years ago where OneWeb and Starlink were in the path of collision, but Starlink didn't think that it will collide, so they didn't maneuver. So again, we don't have a general definition to collision probability. What is high risk? So I think there has to be a protocol or even like a definition around risk. It is very difficult to answer a question like this because it totally depends on what do you want to do, because it's all luck. You operate everything by luck, right? So that is the situation today. And we've seen certain instances where satellite operators have maneuvered but missed adding this maneuver to their calculations, and that has again led to a collision event in the orbit. So there are different instances. So again, it totally depends on the operators. When we have a global satellite operator, like a mega constellation operator today, like Starlink and OneWebs, both have to agree upon a single metric for them to be able to maneuver in the orbit. And I think that is where we have organizations like Space Data Association, which is ensuring that these people publish their ephemeris data to public domain so that you understand the collision risks. But the main problem here is we don't have a single definition for collision risk. So one of the instances that we recently discussed was, again, this was with Nobu from Astroscale. We were at the UN, and he was telling that when you had to purchase data from several SSA operators, when you were doing your mission, ELSA-D, all these operators were providing different results, which led to a lot of confusion and what to do. So again, that brings back to the point of which data is correct, which is not. So there is no transparency.
Sorry. So, well, while I do policy, but I do not regard regulation is not panacea, or regulation itself is the sole answer. But at the same time, for this question, I think it's very important to have sort of globally shared guidelines and national regulators implemented through their national regulation. I think the case of US or the major company belongs, I think there's an issue of who is the regulator, or an Article 6 kind of, organ is an issue. But I think even if commercial company, they are under some jurisdiction of particular regulators. So I think it's part of the regulator's responsibility to make sure that their companies are sort of in line with the space sustainability.
So one thing is like operation side, policy side, both people talk about the big mega constellation. As when I was doing my PhD, I calculated how many satellite will be in the orbit, and it will be not like 10,000 like mega satellite constellation, or not 20,000. It will go 83,000 satellites by 2035, and that's a very big one. So yes, both side, policy, operation side, handling, it will be very much important. Only in LEO, GEO we have only specific position like 2,000 satellite, or more than how many satellite you can put it to operate on one country to provide a perfect data system. It's very much limited. So yes, we have to talk, we have to understand, and we have to share the data.
If I may add to that, so for sustainability, as you know, there are so many different consortiums that are working on this. We have Converse, we have IADC, we have the UN, we have ITU, AIAA, GSOA. I can go on and on about the list of people who are considering sustainability. And as my colleagues have all mentioned, we need to come together and agree on some standards, some definitions that that allow us to actually maneuver, actually share information that's actually relevant to all of us. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in making sure that the information comes together to the right people at the right time.
But again, a lot of self-motivation involved in coming to the table and being part of that conversation. All right, so looking next at some of the recent problems that we've seen with the risk of debris. So Anirudh, you already mentioned the Intelsat 33E breakup that we have. So we now have 500 pieces of debris in GEO. Normally we think of debris as a risk for LEO operators. So obviously that's not the case, but nonetheless, Kongsberg Nanoavionics recently reported that their satellite was impacted by potentially a piece of debris, potentially a micrometeorite. So, you know, there are these risks, and there's a whole spectrum of response that we could have in the face of this risk, right? We could just choose to ignore it and do nothing and continue operating like we always have. Space is big, space is great. We could monitor the risk, right? We could use Digantara service and be aware of what's going on, but not take any action in association with that, or we could try to actively remove some of that risk. So where do you think along that spectrum it makes sense for operators to start thinking about their actions within the next year? Where should they be positioning themselves along that spectrum of activity? And does it matter depending on where they orbit, right? Is that a different answer for a LEO player versus a GEO player versus a multi-orbit player? We're not forgetting MEO, but there aren't as many of you out there.
So when it comes to satellites, again, we have satellites that can maneuver and satellites without propulsion that cannot maneuver. When it comes to the Intelsat breakup, as an example, I mean, there is nothing much that the other satellite operators could do at that point in time, apart from understanding the risks and then just taking actions for the risks that they already have. Again, for debris removal or just clearing up this mess, there is no incentive today for anybody to do such activity apart from government. So nobody would like to spend money to kind of mitigate or remove this junk from the orbit. So unless the operator or like the company that has caused or so basically the satellite belongs to a particular company, and that company has to take steps towards mitigating these risks. Apart from that, there is no business case today, so to say, to remove this debris, and that is something that we've seen on a global scale today.
Can I add one point? The one thing is, like, when we're talking about Intelsat, it's not one event, it's more than 680 events happened previously. And when I see research, when I write a paper about sustainability, so there was events when we was doing research in QC University, and we had analysis about the satellite, old satellite problems. Consider the satellite which is launched before 1980s or 1970s. Those satellites have a battery, and battery is a tick-tock bomb. It can explode, and that's maybe cause of the new debris generations also. And these are already in the space, which is not going anywhere because the propulsion was failure or something that cannot send towards the graveyard orbit. Or in the LEO 25-year consideration we are considering, but 5-year consideration also provided, but it's not a regulation. It's just concept side right now, like we have to do it or not. It's depend on the peoples, the companies, and that's how where we have to think about creating new 500 debris will provide a sustainable approach or not.
Looking at the discussions this morning, I saw that many of the GEO operators are actually interested in collaborating with LEO or working with actors in LEO, right? Because basically GEO, there's a market, but everyone was talking about expanding that market and not just GEO, but beyond that. So I think in that sense, it makes no sense for GEO operators to just stay put in GEO. And I think it's the same vice versa in the sense of the orbit itself is different, but in the same time, for your market to expand and for your business to, build and the economy to grow, you really can't be just saying that it's a different person's problem when you're in a different orbit. So yeah, I think it's relevant to everyone in this room, and the faster you're in the discussion, you can be in the room, you can be part of the standard making, you can be in the rule making process. I think, the faster you get into the game, the better.
Yeah, great point. And I'm going to go back to you, Hazuki, because I think that is a pertinent thing for those in the room to be hearing about the space sustainability rating that the World Economic Forum has led. So I wonder if you would share a little bit about that. Why is that something that the WEF decided was within their jurisdiction to do? Why did they need to do it? And has there been any pushback around some of the definitions you guys have placed on the SSR?
Yeah, so for the SSR, I wonder how many of you actually have heard about the SSR? Can you raise your hand if you've heard about it? Yes, yeah, this is because it's a LEO perspective, and for GEO operators, it might not have been too relevant. But basically, the space sustainability rating was developed inside the World Economic Forum with our Global Future Council. It's a committee of stakeholders, experts regarding space. And basically, we realized that we needed incentives for industry when we tackled sustainability aspects. So what SSR is first of all, it's a rating system that's informed by transparent data-based assessment. And second, it's a practical guidance on how to improve sustainability performances and practices. And last but not least, it's a platform for action-focused collaboration. So basically, through the process, when we're going through the rating, the companies will learn how they can make their missions better so that it would be more sustainable. And this started in 2016, so it started, the development, started with 2016 in collaboration with ESA, MIT, Bryce Tech, and UT Austin. And now in 2021 afterwards, it's been run by EFPL. So it's run by an NGO running out of the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne. And through the ratings, the sustainability ratings have done a few for OHB, Stellar, TU Delft, and Durosat. And earlier this year, in June 2024, Eutelsat OneWeb Group, they received the Platinum Award for Sustainability. So, of course, there were pushbacks, I won't say pushbacks, but discussions in the beginning of how not transparent the ratings were, or of course there were many comments, but that is the iteration between the industry to make these ratings better and more transparent and more meaningful for the industry. So as of now, I think it's a successful case of showing and supporting companies to build incentives around being ranked as a sustainability player. We've heard stories that it has brought a lot of investment, not direct investment, let's say, but it has brought them to a scale when they're able to say we are a sustainable player. And of course, nowadays with ESG, CSR, there's more money flowing that way than a non-responsible player.
All right, talk to Hazuki to learn more. Do we have any audience questions that we can pull up on stage? So ESG, pointing to ESG, has lost some popularity in other industries, become something that distracts from core business. Certainly have heard that as well. So is this a risk for the space industry as well, right? Will we, sustainability has been popular for a couple years now. Are we not going to be talking about it next year because people will think we need to be redoubling our efforts on focusing on just revenue? Or is there a connection there? What do you think? Hannah Reid, we're going to go with you. You're at the end in my line of sight.
So, for me, what I think is today it's very early for us to talk about sustainability and, solving for that because of the industry and where we are at, and it's too complex. But talking about ESG, I think it has to be considered from day one. So we'll have to look towards implementing things and strategies within the company right now so that in the future we have fruits to that.
Okay, so something you're looking at putting effort into, not taking out of. Okay.
So I think ESG's consideration is already we have, and we are thinking about it, we are talking about it, and that's why we are sitting over here and sustainability side also. So if we are not thinking or talking, then probably we'll lost this concept and we'll be not sitting over here, or the companies like Astroscale will be not here. And sustainability approach is very important for this side of the business. Currently, there are a lot of development we need to be provide, especially policy side. So when the governance and policy will be developed, the business will develop.
Yeah, I think I'm in line with Dani. I think, of course, all space companies are kind of need to be in line with ESG on the ground operation. I think ESG in space is still not clear. Not everyone share the idea. So I think we need to have a time to allow ourselves to discuss what is this, ESG for space now.
I agree with everyone in the sense of ESG. When we talk about ESG, everyone thinks to talk about the terrestrial side, and that's how the other industries see it. But for space, I don't want to say special, but we're different in a way that we're dependent on the orbit of being accessible. We're dependent on the frequencies being available for us. I think we need to think about the environment in a different way, not just only talking about the sustainability on Earth and the supply chains and the terrestrial side, but also we have to see space as an environment that we preserve. So I think, yes, to me, it's interesting that we're all losing sight for ESG. It's very obvious that we need to work on it, or we're going to lose access to space.
So perhaps that the space industry is more intimately tied, its revenues, its core business priority is more intimately tied to having a sustainable environment than other terrestrial-based industries where it's sort of seen as a polishing sheen. Okay, thanks for that question. So looking at the next one, satellites still fail early in life from new space companies. Should there be a rule that only proven designs can fly above a certain altitude? So presumably that new designs, if they fail, would be low enough to re-enter shortly. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, that's an interesting idea in that it could reduce failures on orbit, but at the same time, it could reduce how quickly innovation is deployed. So I'll open that up to anyone if they want to jump in on this question of if we should limit where new designs can go.
Okay, this is one good question for me because I came from entrepreneurship side. I started multiple businesses and help and develop. So when I see like failure is the process of learning things. Yes, it can create debris, but if I come and I think like a startup side, the people don't have money to use the proven technology, but there is the same times when I am creating a laser detumbling solution for orbital lasers. Same times this technology has never been developed or not proven in the space, so it's my responsibility to achieve TRL9. For that, I have to go first time. It's not. So failure will be there, but it's a learning phase, but I have to be follow like SSR guidelines, so that my satellite system can be come back. There are multiple satellites which thruster failures are there. There are the like communication systems or nano avionics systems. The debris can impact on the satellite's solar panels and stop the working of their power generation or some things. So these type of systems are there. So yes, satellite failure in early life is there possibility. The important is like the guidelines to be come back, return back. So we cannot stop people to send new technology. I'll be happy if people make new technology, but also consider how to come back.
I think a piece of pushback there might be that why should new companies want to test new technologies? And you say that there's a lack of money to make sure that it is going to go off perfectly. Why should everyone else have to suffer from that happening? But again, no, I think it's a great thing to have that, and also to keep in mind that failures can happen, like you say, even with established technologies towards the end of life as well. And we've seen that with satellites from manufacturers who've been building them for decades can still fail as well. All right, you guys are testing my eyes here, but implementation of satellite, space asset end-of-life mitigation, issues remain about older defunct assets and how to remove them. ownership and liability, huge questions, especially for companies that may not exist anymore or where governments don't want to take responsibility for those spacecraft. So what is the best approach? Is forced reentry, burn up the best approach? There's also been a lot of pushback there against impact on the atmosphere. So I guess generally thoughts about old space assets and how do we manage that? Is reentry the best approach? I think you've done the most work on this from a debris perspective.
Yes, I think there are several aspects. I pick up the maybe liability aspects as I have. I think in the theory of international relations and outer space law, outer space treaty, ownership, the private companies could be changed, but the responsibility and jurisdiction of the registered states will not change. They cannot give up the responsibility. So at the end of the day, the ultimate responsibility is in the hands of the registry state. So I know that's not the, will not solve the answer, but I think it's one part of the answer.
I think we might end there. Okay, a lot of topics on sustainability, a lot of things we haven't gotten to yet. So find the speakers this week. They will be available to chat and share with you more. Thank you so much, and thank you for APSCC for inviting this panel and this discussion to take place. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.